Welcome to Customer-Focused Differentiation in a Highly Competitive Marketplace, Part 2, Module 2, Measuring Customer Experience Differentiation Outcomes. I'm Aruni.
And I'm Scott.
We're going to talk about measuring outcomes. We want you to know that there are multiple available tools and measurements in the customer experience world. The ones that we're going to talk about today is customer satisfaction, otherwise known as CSAT, Net Promoter Score, or NPS, Customer Effort Score, as well as some informal measurements. As Peter Drucker said, what gets measured gets managed. So here we'll start with customer satisfaction. The CSAT score intends to measure a customer's satisfaction with the service received. In its simplest form, it's expressed as a percentage between 0 and 100, with 100% representing complete customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction score stems from research conducted in the mid-1980s. It was originally used for durable goods. Additional research was done in the 90s and early 2000s. As we're just going to discuss CSAT here, it got started at J.D. Power and Associates, which originally focused on the automotive industry. It has subsequently been adapted for use in other industries. You'll also notice that calculations and scales can vary. InfoQuest performed a statistical analysis of CSAT data encompassing over 20,000 customer surveys conducted in 40 countries. And here's an overview of the findings. A totally satisfied customer contributes 2.6 times as much revenue to a company as a somewhat satisfied customer. A totally satisfied customer contributes 14 times as much revenue as a somewhat dissatisfied customer. A totally dissatisfied customer decreases revenue at a rate equal to 1.8 times what a totally satisfied customer contributes. Totally satisfied customers have a repurchase rate that is 3 to 10 times higher than that of a somewhat satisfied customer. So this illustrates the importance of measuring customer satisfaction. Here are some ways that customer satisfaction is calculated. Happy customers divided number of customers asked can give you a satisfaction score. You can also take the number of good responses divided by the total number of surveys received times 100 to get your CSAT percentage.
And here are a couple of CSAT surveys so you can see the differences. On this one, it's done on the 0 to 10 scale. And on this next one, it's done from the very dissatisfied to very satisfied scale. So there's a whole bunch of different types of ways to measure it.
Some of the positives of using CSAT score is that it was the original customer experience measurement, so there's a lot of information and data behind it. Studies show that CSAT has a correlation to higher revenue. It's also actionable. Changes can be measured for effectiveness over time. It can be used to help reduce customer churn. You can also have a weighted index that's calculated for every individual customer, and you can look at distributions in different views for different segmentations.
Some of the negatives of CSAT is it can distort measurements based on the most vocal customers. Satisfaction also lacks a clear connection to loyalty, meaning it doesn't consider emotional attachment or loyalty of a customer. And we need to ask ourselves, is satisfaction really the goal? I think back when J.D. Power started this measurement, CSAT was done for automotive and hard goods. And satisfaction was important back then. Since then, we're going to talk about loyalty. And one thing we do know is that customers always change. So maybe we won't be looking at satisfaction or loyalty sometime in the future. And it's also less scalable than NPS, which we're going to talk about next. So here's the Net Promoter Score. We're going to show you a video coming up that talks about it, but it all stems from an Harvard Business Review article that was published in 2003 based on studies done by Bain Consulting and Satmetrics. And it really netted it out into a question, or a series of two questions, with a derivative right here in the orange, which is what is the likelihood that you would recommend company X to a friend or colleague? And then, of course, asking you why. So what they found in their study is that promoters, which will show you the scale, Promoters account for 80% of referrals in most businesses. Detractors account for 80% of negative word of mouth. Promoters generally churn at much lower rates than other customers, which means they have longer, more profitable relationships with the company, meaning customer lifetime value. And on average, an industry's NPS leader outgrew its competitor by a factor greater than 2x. So here's our video.
What is Net Promoter Score, or NPS? In 2003, Fred Reichheld wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review called "The One Number You Need to Grow." He was looking for a lens to predict a company's future growth and value, post-tech bubble, pre-GFC, in the disruptive world of online and digital media. His theory was that companies who were loved by their customers, so much so that customers would happily recommend them, are more likely to grow. The old chestnuts of market share, customer satisfaction surveys, and financial models involved analysis paralysis and were not working anymore. The breakthrough is a very simple question, which Reichheld dubbed the ultimate question, which became the title of his book. The ultimate question is, on a 0 to 10 scale, how likely is it that you would recommend our product, service, or brand to a friend or colleague? This score is then followed up with the simple open question: what is the primary reason for your score? The 0 to 10 scale captures the intuitive measurement of attitudes and feelings. The open question reveals the customer's main reason for that score in their own words. No lies, no statistics. These results were then studied and benchmarked, from which 3 categories of response emerged. Those scoring 9 or 10 signal that their lives are enriched by the experience which led to future purchases, unsolicited referrals, and great feedback. They are called promoters. Those scoring 7 or 8 got what they wanted but no more, which meant they could be easily swayed by competitive offers and they made few referrals. They were called passives. The final group, scoring 0 to 6, are detractors, reluctant purchasers or customers who had a bad experience. They either switched or become a nuisance, thus driving up the cost to serve. Percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors revealed a score that is as tangible as net profit is to bean counters and signaled a real measure of customer satisfaction and future growth potential. Reichheld called this Net Promoter Score. NPS has proved to be a huge breakthrough in how customer satisfaction is measured globally and allows comparison of businesses in and across any industry, anywhere in the world. It also gives prospective customers an impartial assessment of the service experience pre-purchase. From here, a company can develop a plan on how to improve the score. This invariably involves breaking down and scoring each key customer touchpoint for your product, service, or brand as often as possible. This is where the score in each step, together with the plans to convert detractors and passives to promoters, becomes a system by which one can improve customer experience. The beauty of NPS is its simplicity, and Reichheld has 3 simple implementation guidelines. 1. The results must be transparent, consistently compiled and communicated so your team can take action and track their results. 2. Companies must create closed-loop learning and improvement processes and build them into daily operations. Bake the feedback into improving service and track the results. 3. CEOs and leaders must make creating promoters mission critical. To learn how NPS is transforming customer experience at Macquarie Telecom, go to macquarietelecom.com.
Okay, so one more time. Your Net Promoter Score is the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors.
So some of the positives about Net Promoter Score, it's used by 2/3 of the Fortune 1000. It helps measure, evaluate, and build customer loyalty because has links to business outcomes. It's more predictive than CSAT. It can help you identify and create more customer advocates. It provides actionable customer feedback. It can help you identify churn risk, and has been proven to drive revenue growth and customer lifetime value. We have another video we'd like to share with you about a Net Promoter success story. And it's by Bain & Company, so we'll launch that.
In my mind, Schwab represents one of the most impressive, most remarkable turnarounds in business history. Moving from a negative 35% net promoter score, where more of your customers dislike you and want you to fail than promote you and want you to succeed. That's a difficult hole to climb out of. And with that 70-point swing in net promoter, it is, in my experience, the greatest success story to date.
They really have all of the HR levers involved. They change the way they recruit, the way they train, the way they recognize people. All of these things that are really day-to-day reinforcements that this is the way we do business, the way we work.
One of the things I learned in watching Walt turn around this company is that there is a moral imperative that treating customers right, living up to the golden rule, creates an energy in an organization that lets it achieve and innovate and accomplish things that they could never do if they were motivated just purely by economics.
The way they've taken Net Promoter Score and they've made it their own, this whole idea of CPS, the Client Promoter Score, because it had to have the word client in it. It's been not just something that they talk about, not just some nifty initiative they have, but really just a way of life, a way of doing business.
There was a gentleman who called in to our service center on the phone, and he was having problems filling out a loan. He was under financial duress, and he admitted to her that he didn't know how to read. And what our rep did at that point was go to this individual's place of business, sit down with him, help him through the forms, get his loan, cover the emergency he had. I mean, that takes seeing the world through the client's eyes, the core of our strategy, but it also takes heart. This company has gone through two periods in the last 15 years where our economic model was put under tremendous stress. And this low rate environment has had at least as much impact, if not more, to our economic model than did the decline in commissions almost 15 years ago. But it's a vastly different response this time around. Because we not only have promoter score deep within our values and our beliefs, it's also core to our strategy. Do the right thing. Follow the belief that if you serve clients in the way that you'd like to be served, they're going to want to do more business with you. And it enables us to take a little bit of a longer term view and have confidence in what we're doing.
One of the challenges that we have at Schwab is that we have a lot of employees in a lot of different locations, and anchoring to one set of beliefs and practices can be difficult to do. So we leverage a champions network, and these are folks that have a passion for client loyalty, who talk about the voice of the client, investments that we're making as an organization to make the experience better.
We get to share basically what's working for us, what's making raving fans, what's making clients happy, those stories that make a difference.
I received a call from a gentleman who was expecting a wire coming into his account that he was going to use to pay for a down payment on a new house. Through some other circumstances with his family, they had already previously sold their other house. Without this wire coming in, they would be without a home. It didn't come through due to some incorrect instructions on the wire because it can get a little tricky sometimes. So what I did is he gave me the other person's name, phone number, and we conferenced, connected all the information together, finally got the wire in. I mean, this guy would have been basically homeless without it. So it was just made me feel good to be able to, save his day and his family's.
Sixes and below are detractors. How we handle those is upper management will reach out to the advisors and clients on individual basis and discuss the concern.
We have a closed loop process, which is incredibly important to make sure that whenever we hear something that we're sensitive to, that we go back and we talk with the clients, and there's an intimacy that gets built out of it.
We pick up the phone and say, hey, notice that, we didn't do something for you in the branch just right. Tell me about that. I have talked to clients who have run into that who are shocked that a manager of a branch would take the time to do that.
We've always been proud that we do the right things. Clients know that. We'll bring them along that financial journey of success. And again, we'll check in with them through our CPS. We've kind of gone back to the basics, and we really need to stick to our core values that we started with many, many years ago.
The majority of U.S. citizens do not trust financial services firms. What the promoter score does is it lays out a path. It's almost like guardrails, ensuring that as we move forward, we're doing everything within our power to be that trusted firm. Something as strong and heartfelt as promoter score, you can see it in people way beyond the numbers that show up on a piece of paper.
Okay, so Net Promoter is not without its negatives. Especially those seem to come mostly from CSAT advocates. It's almost like Ford and Chevy or Microsoft and Apple. Those two camps don't really see each other's as the definitive measurement. Another issue with Net Promoter Score is it is reliant on surveys, and there's definitely a decline in response rates to surveys. So there's survey fatigue. It doesn't answer why. You saw the closed loop processes in the video. You have to seek that info out and figure out how to solve it. It doesn't, and it shouldn't stand alone. It's not the only metric you're going to use. There are significant regional differences in how you are scored. You know, people in Japan don't score the same as the people in the United States. It can create tunnel vision. You know, in mature organizations that have had it around for a long time, they seem to have a tunnel vision when it comes to this, and there's lots of gaming that is institutionalized. And without the will to change culturally and a good plan, Net Promoter is not going to work.
Thanks, Scott. So now we're going to transition to talking about customer effort score, and we're going to begin with a video that outlines what that is.
I think it's fair to say that we are all customers, but never before has there been a time when we've had more access to information, more choices about the products and services that we use, but equally, less time. And what customers want from companies has been massively changing over the last few decades. But back in 2010, Harvard Business Review published a piece of research that was done by the Corporate Executive Board. And this research was really game-changing in the way that we look at what customers want from companies that they choose to buy from. They surveyed tens of thousands of customers and hundreds of companies around the globe, and the research really demonstrated two key things. The first thing that it demonstrated was beyond meeting customer expectations, there is very little additional loyalty to be gained. So the difference between meeting and exceeding expectation doesn't necessarily bring you additional loyalty from customers. The second thing that the research showed was that effort is a really, really good measure to predict whether customers will choose to buy from you and stay with you in the future. So the easier you make it, the more likely you are to create loyal customers. The harder you make it, the opposite is therefore true. And so what we're really saying is what customers want, these time-pressed customers who've got all of this choice and all of this information available, what we really, really want from companies we choose to buy from and stay with today is that they make it really easy for us to get what we want. And those companies that pay attention to that and are working on that as part of their strategy will do the best in the long term. I always ask people what they think it is that makes it easier or harder for customers. And 99% of the time, people will say, the process. It's always the process that makes it more difficult. But what's really interesting is all of the science and all of the research says that the process, or the steps in the process, account for about 30 to 35% of my perception of easy or difficult. The other 65% is accounted for by the way that you make me feel during the experience. Now, there are some really, really simple ways that we can influence and affect the way that somebody feels in a conversation, and here are just a few examples to bring to life for you. The first way we can influence the way somebody feels is in their first minute of the conversation. Are you inspiring trust right at the start? Are they getting that sense of relief when they're talking to you that thank goodness I got through to you? Are you demonstrating that you're on their side? Are you advocating from their point of view? Because this really does influence how they feel. Another thing we can do is be really specific about the language that we use, because it does make a big difference. For example, if I say to you, what I need you to do is, that might give me a perception of it's all down to me. But equally, if you say, all you need to do is, then that creates a different perception. That makes me feel like it's an easier stage of the process. Very, very small change makes a massive difference to how I feel about my experience. Another thing we can do is we can talk to customers on their terms. So I can pick up what it is that you need from the conversation, and I can make sure that I'm giving you that in the conversation. So if you want more detail, I can give you more. If I sense that you're in a bit of a rush, I can speed up to make sure that you get what you want. Another thing we can do is we can be really helpful in the way that we navigate customers through what can feel quite complex processes. And if we're helpful and we help to make things feel easier for them, then that will make a big difference to the conversations. If we do all of these things in every conversation, we're going to really impact and deepen the relationships that we have with customers. And fundamentally, that will deliver us loyal customers in the future.
So in a nutshell, customer effort score is a metric to measure customer service satisfaction with one single question. And we'll talk about how that question has evolved over time in the next few slides. The underlying thought is that service organizations create loyal customers by reducing customer effort. Customer effort score is the newest customer experience measurement. So the first effort to measure customer effort is how much effort did you personally have to put forth to handle your request. On a 5-point scale from very low effort to very high effort, number 5, is an extremely strong predictor of future customer loyalty. 96% of customers reporting high effort experiences become more disloyal, compared with only 9% of those with low effort experiences with your company.
And then customer effort score kind of evolved into just these easy, neither, or difficult. And you'll see the calculation below. And here's one more calculation, and it looks almost, you'll notice, like a net promoter score. Percent easy minus percent difficult equals the net easy score. And then we'll move to effort score 2.0, where they revised the question. And the question is, the company made it easy for me to handle my issue. And then you can use the 1 to 5, 1 to 10 scale. Here's a 1 to 7 scale.
So the positives of using customer effort score, it's an easy to understand premise for the customer. It emphasizes how well the basics are executed, a proactive approach to heading off future issues, and it's naturally channel focused and specific. It also emphasizes empowering frontline people to make the customer experience more effortless. It encourages self-service solutions so the customer can find solutions for themselves. It incentivizes timely and meaningful resolution of customer issues by people on the front line and throughout the whole entire company. It's a very complementary measurement to NPS.
So some negatives. It's not really well suited to evaluating the entire customer experience, meaning the relationship part. It's really good at the transactional level, but not as good at the customer experience level. And that's probably why people pair it with NPS. So it's naturally more volatile than other measurements, of course, because it's transactional. And if you have a bad transaction or a high friction experience, you're going to get a worse rating. It lacks the volume and transparency of studies that support the other methods, because they've been around much longer. It doesn't address culture, except in an indirect way. And it doesn't address why or help with root cause analysis.
So we have this great video that's in depth that will share more information about customer effort.
Hello, my name is Nicola Millard. I am BT's Customer Experience Futurologist. And what I want to talk to you today about is some new research that we have done on customer effort. Now, you may be asking, why on earth are you doing research on customer effort? The answer to that question is, well, to be honest, we've been talking about effort for a very long time. It's not a new topic. But back in 2010, there was a landmark article in Harvard Business Review that caused a lot of discussion in customer experience circles. That paper basically said that you don't necessarily need to satisfy your customers. You sometimes just need to make it easy for them, and they will be loyal to you. So since then, we've been doing a lot of research about customer behavior, including the autonomous customer. And the interesting thing about autonomous customer is we slipped in a question about effort and easiness and loyalty. So the one thing, loyalty's been in decline in that survey for a while. Only 44% of customers are saying, they're saying loyalty is a thing of the past, basically. Why should they be loyal? They have a lot of choice now. So we can't take loyalty for granted. And certainly there's a lot of conversations around loyalty being dead. Now, I don't think it is. We do still see a lot of loyalty behaviours. But is that loyalty connected with effort? Again, in the autonomous customer, we asked the question around effort, and 78% of customers in the UK and 82% of customers in the US said, I will do business with you if you make it easy for me. So again, there is a pointer towards effort, easy, actually being quite a good indicator of loyalty. But the other rather intriguing thing about easy or effort is that it's not just about loyalty. It can also be around perceptions of value for money. So if you've had a difficult experience, you probably don't necessarily think you've got great value for money. So even in, say, governments or organisations where there is no choice, effort has a bearing in people's perception of value for money. Which is why effort is quite a fascinating topic to look at. So in the research, we asked Henley Business School to conduct some research for us around what is effort, who is doing effort, and actually does it have a bearing on loyalty, satisfaction, and value for money. So the fundamental first question is, well, what on earth is effort? Actually, if we look at the academic literature, it kind of boils down to four things that constitute effort. So there's cognitive effort. In other words, how much brain power do we have to apply to figure out what to fill in a form, or where to find stuff on a website, or how to get this product up and running. So brain power is one thing that we need to try and reduce, so cognitive effort. Time is a huge factor impacting on effort. For instance, queuing is a classic example. How much time do I have to spend in this queue? Is it worth the effort? So time is a big factor. Then there's physical effort. So, lugging things around a retail store, trying to drag suitcases across an airport. That's wearing. So that's another component of effort. And then finally, emotional effort. We've all been there. Anger, frustration, all of those things can be components that sap energy from us. So in terms of looking at things like customer journeys, we can start to break them down and look at them in a slightly different way. let's start to break them down in terms of physical effort, emotional effort, and start to see where we can add value, where we can take effort away, and potentially get more value for effort. So actually, one of the things that we do find in the research is effort does have a value. It's a cost. So we need to put effort in sometimes, and if the effort isn't worth it, we're probably not going to do it. And yet, do we really take effort seriously in customer experience? So one of the things that we can do with this measure is to start to look, for a start, an overview of how easy are we as a company to do business with. That's one thing that we can start to ask on a very top level. The other thing that we can do is to start to delve into individual channels. So how easy is it to deal with the contact centre, for example? To deal with the IVR system, press 1 for this, press 2 for that. To go on the website, to use social media to interact. You can start to rank all of those against each other in terms of easy scores. So, for example, looking at an IVR system, if people are getting lost in it, they're not ranking it as particularly easy to get through. How can we start to redesign that, make it simpler, maybe move from press 1 for this, press 2 for that, to things like natural language IVR? Interestingly enough, that's one thing that BT has done in terms of effort, is to look very specifically at IVR, because that was one thing that wasn't that easy to get through. And you can compare press 1, press 2 with natural language. And what we found was people found natural language much easier. So how do you measure easy? Because intuitively, what gets measured gets managed. One of the case studies that Henley did for us, Moira Clark at Henley, actually looked at BT itself. We looked at a number of other companies, both in the B2B space and also in the B2C space. A lot of those customers actually elected to remain anonymous. The great thing about the BT story is that we started to pick out easy and effort as a very significant thing for us maybe 2 years ago. And then we started to say, how do we measure it? How do we make it operationally meaningful? How do we incorporate it into the other measures that we have? So we measure things like advocacy through things like Net Promoter Score, customer satisfaction, right first time. So why not measure easy as well? But how do you measure easy? Actually, we took a leaf from the Net Promoter Score book, and we've created a Net Easy score, which is very similar to Net Promoter, but it asks a very different question. The fundamental question being, on a scale of 1 to 7, how easy is it to do business with us? Where 1 is fabulously easy and 7 is horribly difficult. Now this is a net score, so effectively we take those scores from customers as part of our satisfaction surveys. We can start to ask customers these questions. We take one score from another, we get a positive or a negative number. Positive if it's really easy, negative if it's not. So we can look at high-level score in terms of how well we're doing, and then really start to understand where people are getting difficulties in terms of interacting with us. Now, in doing this process, we learned a number of things. The first thing is we started asking the question, effort. How much effort did you have to put in to do business with us? And that wasn't a great question. Actually, the much better question was, how easy is it to do business with us? So that we learned for a start. We played around with scales as well, and actually 7 is a great scale because you can't really sit in the middle. You have to make a decision one way or another. So we've used that very powerfully to gain operational insights into where we're easy or difficult to do business with. And then another critical question is to ask why. So we've used NetEasy in a very powerful way in BT. But we weren't the only case study. And Moira at Henley interviewed a number of companies around whether effort was useful to them, whether it was hype or whether it was help. The interesting thing that we found was there is a distinction between how B2B companies were using effort versus B2C companies. B2C, we're using it in a very similar way. Obviously, BT is a B2C in this example. So they were looking at channel strategies. They were looking at how easy are we to do business with. B2B companies were applying it much more as a process measure. So using things like the voice of the customer to improve how processes were flowing and how effectively a sort of a supply chain was performing in terms of delivering service and how effort could be reduced from end to end. So there were subtle differences between B2B and B2C that we learned. But the really intriguing thing that Henley found as a result of this study was that the Harvard Business Review article back in 2010 wasn't entirely right. Now, they were saying forget about delighting your customers, just make it easy. The evidence that we found looking at companies that were actually applying this was a little bit more subtle than that. And that was much more around maybe not delighting your customers all the time, but delighting them when it actually is valued by them. Because obviously customer delight, customer satisfaction, good customer service still matters. But really what we found was if you can start to reduce customer effort in the process where it's far too high and where customers value it, do so. And that will then have a knock-on effect to both loyalty and also to perceptions of value for money. To the extent that the BT study found that people that ranked us as very easy to do business with us were actually 40% less likely to churn. So, in summary, we found that effort is a very fascinating topic for customer experience. It's a very good actionable measure in terms of looking at your service strategies, looking at your channels and how you're performing, and really looking at applying efforts, reducing that effort in those channels where it really matters. And it does have an impact on things like loyalty and perception of value for money. So it can be used as a very effective mechanism to evaluate how your customer experience is doing across multiple channels. So it isn't hype, it is help. And if you do want to have a look at the study, there is plenty in it that will keep you hopefully trying to understand how your customers want to do business with you, trying to understand where you can actually make it easier for them to do business with you, and actually start to reduce that effort and measure it too. So thank you for listening.
So after that great video on customer effort, I'm going to transition to talk about some informal measurements. So we've talked about CSAT, NPS, and customer effort, and we would be remiss if we didn't mention there are informal measurements that no one has directly quantified, but some things you should keep in mind while you are looking at the success of your customer experience programs is the customers that become references. Those are really key successes that you should look at. Customers that provide case studies and testimonials, that they provide positive word of mouth and social proof on social media channels and other areas that help spread the word in a positive way for you. There's also negative we mentioned earlier, so that's something to keep track of as well. The inner circle of customer feedback. So if you're getting great customer feedback, positive or negative, that is a sign that you're engaging with your customers. Some internal measurements that you should look at, it's informal, is if your internal team, your product team, your support team relies on your customer success team or your call center team to give feedback internally so the customer can better improve, so you can better improve your products and services. And you can also measure the results of your cross-sell and upsell efforts with an existing customer base. If you're doing things well, that becomes easier. So to summarize, there are multiple customer experience measurement methods. We talked about CSAT, NPS, customer effort, and as well as some of the qualitative informal ways to measure customer experience. We talked about each measurement and having its positives and negatives. It's important to focus on using measurements that match your customers' channels and adjust as needed.
So it's really important to match the I take that back. One of the important things to recognize in this is we had CSAT early, we had that talked about satisfaction, we had NPS that talked about loyalty, we have the customer effort score, which talks about monitoring effort, is we have to match the cadence of change of our customers. So as our customers evolve, we evolve.
Yeah, and for the measurements to be effective and believable, focus on some early wins with using these scores. You have to make sure, as we've talked in part 2, is obtain executive sponsorship. So please go back and review the insights from part 2, module 1 as well. So that concludes customer-focused differentiation in a highly competitive marketplace. Part 2, module 2, measuring customer experience differentiation outcomes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.